Hello and welcome to everybody here. It's great to see so many people I haven't seen in a while, and so many people I see every day, which is just really, really wonderful. And I suppose the best thing is when we write, and we wrote this lovely proposal back, I think it was in October, and you put it in, it's easy to write everything up, put everything on paper, and actually to see it come into fruition now is just really, really wonderful. So I'm really delighted to have so many collaborations. 2 weeks ago, I think I was in Cork. I don't know where James is. I presume he's here somewhere. And we launched the Web Accessibility Statement and Toolkit for the tertiary education sector, which was the first, and we were with our UCC colleagues in doing that. And now here we are with our MTU colleagues and all other collaborations on this project as well. So as you know, Path 4 funding arrived in 2016. It really has been a driver in terms of equity and universal access. And when the Minister was here last year, he indicated about the Path 4 funding, and true to his word, Path 4 funding arrived, and true to the usual, it was in the summer, which was just wonderful. And but anyway, we had to get on and work with it and develop a project, and so we did. And as Niamh has indicated, the head were really thought and got people together to work collaboratively at HEI. So instead of us all working as silos, we are all within the tertiary education sector. So that was really excellent, and that gave rise to these collaborative projects that we are now going to hear. So in conjunction, we'll hear about the National Charter for Tertiary Education that is being developed. But here we're now going to listen to the project in relation to the universal design in relation to the leadership. And Dr. Flynn has already referenced this, and Dr. Flynn has participated already in the pilot project that has been run out. So I would really welcome to the stage now my ATU colleagues and my MTU friends that I know for quite a while as well. So Dr. Laura Hegarty, Mairead McCann, our ATU project leads, our MTU project leads are Aileen Kennedy, and also Margaret Finch, and they're going to give us a flavour of what's been happening so far in the project. And then they're also going to ask us, our opinions, what are our challenges, what are opportunities. So we're here to feed into this project to develop the package the open package that they're going to be developing for leaders. And it's really important because we have seen a lot, for educators and that, and leaders need to be involved as well. So we do embed this at policy level, and we do look at it from a funding perspective as well. So I welcome you here, and I'm delighted to have you all. I think they're all in front of me.
Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here and lovely to meet you all. And thanks, Michelle, and thanks to Orla. Is Orla? Yeah, just to say thank you to Orla Flynn as well, one of our colleagues from MTU. So delighted with the warm welcome from Orla as well. So my job in this morning's session is to talk you through the project that we have been working on, and Mairead is going to talk you through the actual pilot itself and give you a taster of it, and as Michelle said, going to ask you for your feedback as well and your insights. So maybe just to start, I suppose just to talk through ourselves, the team. What we have up there is our collaborative space that we developed online. We took a picture of ourselves the other day when we were preparing for this evening's session. So my name is Aileen Kennedy, as was said earlier, and I work in MTU as Assistant Registrar and Head of Student Engagement and Teaching and Learning, and also have responsibility for academic quality assurance and enhancement. Margaret Finch, my colleague who is here, Margaret leads out on teaching and learning activities and student engagement actions within MTU, and Mairead McCann and Laura Hegarty are lecturers here in ATU, and now through this project have become our colleagues to MTU. So we're delighted to be working with them. ATU is the lead on this project and MTU is the partner, and we have a wider, I suppose, collaborative group. So we're here representing the project today, but we're representing it on behalf of the wider working group. And I suppose as the project has evolved, I'm just going to flick forward there, this is a representation of the collaborators that we have nationally on the project. And you can see the wonderful spread, even geographically, when you look at it there, the national collaboration that's involved in this particular project. But all of the organisations are listed there that we're representing today. And I suppose particularly we have a range of organisations, we have a range of higher education institutions, further education institutions, students and learners from further education, from ETBs, as well as from the higher education institutions. So the spread is quite significant. And I suppose just to say today is that we are open to welcoming further collaborations and would absolutely be delighted with that. So as the day goes on, we'd love to hear from you if you'd like to get involved and feed into the project, because it's a work in progress. It's a development, I suppose, that we're working through. And I suppose I'd like to just say, and Orla mentioned it earlier, just particularly, I suppose, delighted with the involvement from the National Tertiary Office, because very much, I suppose, we're looking at this project from a tertiary education perspective, further and higher education coming together to have real impact on the education experience of our students and our learners. So we're delighted with that, and we would welcome a further involvement from further education and from students and learners as well. So I'm just going to move on and talk you through, I suppose, some of our milestones so far with the project. As I said, it's very much a work in progress. So maybe just to start, maybe just to talk a little bit about myself, because this project is focused on senior leaders and particularly on providing training and support to senior leaders on universal design. And as Orla mentioned, senior leaders have a significant, I suppose, role to play in terms of impact and driving universal design and inclusion in the tertiary education sector. So we identified, I suppose, this need for senior leaders to develop this shared language and shared knowledge of universal design, and Orla identified it herself earlier. I suppose for myself, I began my career as a social worker, social science background, and I suppose my own personal and professional values from the outset have always been very much about social justice, inclusion, human rights. And in higher education, when I moved to that sector, I started lecturing in the area of social science, social care, youth and community, early childhood care and education. And then I moved to a role as head of Department of Health and Leisure Department within MTU. And then I worked as Registrar and Vice President for Academic Affairs and Registrar, and also as Assistant Registrar, Head of Student Engagement, Head of Teaching and Learning. And I'm saying all of that because I suppose I'm sharing with you that I suppose as a senior leader and my experience as a senior leader and working alongside other senior leaders, all of us have travelled different journeys as senior leaders. So there can't be an expectation that everybody is in the same place in terms of their level of understanding and knowledge of UD. So there's varying levels of knowledge and understanding there, and that's what I would have experienced. And that's what we have been told, I suppose, by senior leaders, and that's been identified by senior leaders in the process of working through this project. So the value of this training package will be that shared knowledge, that shared understanding of universal design by senior leaders. And I suppose, why is that important? It's important, Orla has already alluded to it. All of you here in this room today, you are all champions of universal design and universal design for learning in particular. And I was thinking, coming to this morning's session, imagine how powerful the transformation would be if all of us here as champions of universal design, whatever our roles are within our organisations, within our institutions, if all of us joined with senior leaders as champions of universal design, and senior leaders having that strategic level, I suppose, impact in organisations, and having that, all of us together having that shared language and that shared understanding, just imagine the potential impact that would have on our organisations and on in our institutions, in bringing about that whole of institution systems, I suppose, approach to universal design and transforming the education sector in terms of education for all. And I suppose the value of that is the impact for our students in terms of inclusion, in terms of belonging, retention, supporting our students to reach their full potential, but also the creation of cultures of inclusion within our organisations for our staff as well as our students. So it's that wider, I suppose, inclusion culture within organisations. So if we have that shared understanding, shared knowledge, and we're working together as senior leaders, as people on the ground, the transformation is, unimaginable in terms of impact. So this is really important, and we're very excited to share, I suppose, this training package with you. So having identified the need, we, I suppose, sought representation, as we've said already, from across the different sectors to inform the project from a tertiary education perspective. We made the decision early on that the package would model in itself the application of universal design, so we very much wanted to model, I suppose, that approach, and that the package would include detail on theoretical perspectives, national policy, legislation, the funding context in terms of UD, applied practice examples of the strategic application of UD as senior leaders, and signposting, I suppose, in particular, to the established information and training that already exists, particularly through UCD, through AHEAD, through NDA. So there's lots of information out there. So we wanted to bring that into a one source, if you like, to signpost that for our senior leaders. Because as we know, senior leaders are often, what's the phrase, time poor and what is it? I can't think of it, but there's a phrase there anyway. But we wanted to make it as efficient as possible, I suppose, in terms of a resource. So we decided then on the training package in terms of format, and I suppose where we are in terms of update is we have designed and created a pilot of the training package. Orla alluded to it earlier that she engaged in a pilot of that. We've one unit developed. So we're seeking feedback, I suppose, as we're going on from senior leaders. What do you think of it? You know, have you feedback on it? Does it work for you? Does it not? What's good, etc. And that feedback is ongoing. I suppose we plan to organise and run symposiums at both this conference, so we're delighted we had the opportunity today. We're also attending a conference next week in Maynooth, sharing a similar symposium and seeking input, I suppose, and involvement for yourselves. And I suppose the training package will journey very much alongside the Charter project, which you'll hear more about during the day, which will be launched in early 2024. So as I said, it's a work in progress. We'd value your input and your insights. And just lastly, just in terms of update, before I hand you over to Mairead, we were just notified in recent days that there's a special issue from AHEAD and All Ireland Society for Higher Education on UD in tertiary education for publication in June 24, and they're seeking, I suppose, input into that, and we would welcome, I suppose, collaborative work maybe in terms of feeding into that special issue on UD in tertiary education. So we'd be delighted to welcome collaboration on that.
So as you can see, the interface here will look very familiar to all of us that have engaged in CPD and self-paced online courses. So what you're seeing here is the introduction page, and it has built-in accessibility features, as Aileen referred to. It was part of our ethos in designing the programme. So I'm hoping to see if it will let me scroll down. The screen here, is that going to, yeah. So as you see here, just to echo the comments that had been made earlier, one of the great parts of collaborating in this project has been the excellent support we've received from across both the higher education and further education sectors. Very positive feedback and engagement, and that's reflected here in the introduction page, where both our presidents from the partner leading institutions very kindly gave up their time to create videos for the course content. So we welcome videos from both Dr. Orla Flynn and Professor Maggie Cusack, as well as from Dr. Fiona Maloney from the National Tertiary Office as well. So what we have in the introductory page, as I just scroll down a little bit, is that we had focused very much on making very clear, transparent learning objectives for the leaders that will participate in the training. So you can see here the setting out of the learning objectives, which Aileen touched upon there in terms of building awareness of the importance of universal design for education and universal design for learning. I think the issue that we had aimed for is that issue of time poverty. And you can see from the course structure that is set out here, the intention is that this would be an easily accessed, self-paced course. The intention is it would be 60 minutes approximately in duration, and there are 4 discrete units within the programme itself. Obviously, they touch on building awareness of UD, of the funding initiatives and the context in terms of strategic planning that Orla also referenced earlier. But we also looked very much at the exemplars of best practice, and that's going to be part of the symposium that we're going to tap into your wide knowledge in the room today. We wanted to illustrate what does the whole of institution lead out of universal design look like in the Irish tertiary sector. We're also excited to see that Unit 4, we built in an international dimension, and I know we have that flavour in the room today, and when Frederick will also be speaking later. Part of our collaborators are also going to work at an intercultural dimension to that unit as well, so we're quite excited about building the content for that. What we'd like to do is just illustrate the content with 2 short video pieces, and that we feel very much show that championing of UD that is at the very heart of this project, and of the strong motivation to be engaged in leadership. So I'm going to see, I'm not sure if you want to play the videos from there, Mike, might be the easiest.
Hello, my name is Aileen Kennedy, Assistant Registrar and Head of Student Engagement with responsibility for teaching and learning at Munster Technological University. You are all very welcome, higher and further education leaders. We're absolutely thrilled, Niamh and I, to have this opportunity to tell you how this training package came about.
As individual institutions, we've been working on implementation of UD, and more specifically UDL, across our organisations for a number of years. The provision of HEA Path 4 Phase 1 Universal Design funding provided us the opportunity to consider multiple ways to embed UD and UDL. However, it really was the think-in brainstorming sessions organised by HEA last summer that resulted in a move from individual institution-led projects to a collaborative national approach.
This training package is one of the results of that collaboration. While ATU and MTU led the development of this training package for leaders, we had commitment and collaboration from many higher education institutions and further education providers who were very much involved in the development and delivery of this training package.
This is a very exciting opportunity for you as leaders, and we look forward to seeing the ongoing impact this training will have in your own organisations and nationally across higher and further educational institutes.
Thank you all for considering this important training opportunity.
So Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is a framework which helps us to embed flexibility. And really the goal is inclusion of all learners. So UDL, there's a set of guidelines, a set of checkpoints, but ultimately it's not a prescriptive or very specific framework. You can adapt it for any discipline that you're in. It can be applied to any stage of education. So you can be talking about primary, post-primary or tertiary education. And what's really important in it is that it embeds options for students. So it's not telling you exactly what to do in terms of your own discipline, because you're the expert in the discipline. But what it does, it allows you to think about and reflect on your practice, and then embed options for multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So that means it's applied to your materials that you're using for your teaching, the activities that you're doing in the classroom or beyond the classroom, as well as your assessment practices and your feedback practices. So it's really every stage of education. So the framework is there, it's developed by CAST. It's very useful, as I said, for reflection, but ultimately it helps you to decide on what actions you might take to embed that flexibility. So it's important to say that Universal Design for Learning is beneficial for every student that you have. So it's particularly beneficial for students who might experience barriers in an educational environment. So that might be a student with a disability or a student who's from a community that would be traditionally distant from higher education, but it benefits every single student that we have. So one of the myths, I suppose, about UDL is that it's just for students with disabilities, but that's not the case at all. They're just a group that would particularly benefit from having those options and that flexibility built in. I should say as well that the UDL framework can be applied beyond the classroom and beyond the teaching and learning environment. And that's actually happening in the new digital badge for universal design for student and learner support and engagement. So we'll get to see the UDL framework used by all of our professional colleagues as well in the education sector.
So as you can see, we're standing on the shoulders of giants somewhat in terms of the community of practice for universal design has been very giving of their time to feed into the collaboration, to build the pilot package and to contribute to the content that will feature in the final version of the programme. What I'd like to just talk to briefly is some of the feedback. As Orla has mentioned, she has kindly volunteered as one of 45 participants in a pilot project over the last couple of weeks that have tested the first unit of the course itself. And we've been gathering very detailed feedback from the participants who represent leadership in the tertiary sector, right through from further higher education, presidents, deans, registrars, assistant registrars, heads of function and student union presidents have kindly participated in the pilot. And you can see a lot of the feedback has been positive in terms of welcoming the need for the CPD itself. You can see, again, just a very positive line, gives clear content on where to start to do a better job. So that sense of feeding in to improve access for all, as we've said. But obviously we're getting very detailed notes to improve. We're all at the quality feedback stage of the year. So how can we improve the course? There's some detailed notes in terms of where there may be slight repetition of content that will help improve and maximise the impact of the 60 minutes that we're aiming for. So as Aileen has said, we want to tap into your knowledge and your expertise. So what we're going to do now in the interactive part of the symposium is to hand over to you to try and capture your thinking and your ideas. Before we just look at the discussion question, you should have on your table a pack. So you'll have a set of guidelines for your table. The first one is, and don't all rush to volunteer, is that we would ask each table to agree a chair. That sounds very Irish. Each table is to have a chair, and we want to encourage a lot of participation in the discussion itself. Please feel free to use words, phrases, or under Tamsin's inspiration, if you want to use images, there are post-its and feedback sheets for you. You can use a voice note, and a little later we'll share email addresses if you want to forward a voice note of your feedback to us. This is just an image of the feedback sheet itself. So we're asking you, how can senior leaders support UD? And we're interested, as Aileen had said, in can you identify what do supports look like? What are potential challenges? But we're especially interested in those exemplars of best practice. So we want to gather those to reflect that in the finalised course. So we're going to hand over to you now. My colleagues as a team, so Laura, Margaret, Aileen and myself will be floating around the room. So if you need any advice or questions, if you just raise your hand, one of us will come to the table. So we're going to set 20 minutes for this activity. I'll flag when there's 10 minutes and then the last 2 minutes, and then a little bit like MasterChef, and the time's up. And we'll just round up before we finish up the session. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. So what I wanted to do now was just briefly talk about, I think there was a kind of a common theme came up, the very first question. So all very good students, the first thing is clarify the ask. And there was some discussion around what do we mean by senior leaders. And I suppose just to say, as a group, we had many discussions around this particular topic, and inevitably, yes, the course has been designed for senior leaders in terms of positions where people within their role have responsibility for strategic planning, for determining strategic objectives, and for making decisions, importantly, about where funding is directed to support those activities on the ground. But the intention always was that we recognise, and particularly in this room, that there are many champions of universal design at all levels of all of our institutions, whether that's within an ETB college, within a technological university or an institute of technology, or a university. So that's a broad range. And indeed within our group there was interesting research that's happening with Trinity and Kerry ETB that's looking at universal design across primary, secondary and tertiary levels. So we didn't seek to corral it. We did in our pilot group obviously go back to that target group in terms of the position of people, but the intention is that the final finished piece of training support will be open access to all, and we are hopeful that anyone with an interest in universal design for education would access the course and make use of the many resources that will be signposted within it as well. So what we wanted just to finish up with were to talk about the next steps, so where all your hard work is going to go when we collect it and collate the feedback for our pilot group. And the intention is the course design is continuing. I think it's mentioned already that we're aligning with the National Charter project, and the intention is that we will be completing the work on the content development and course design over the early autumn period. And just to echo what Aileen had said, we're still welcoming any people that are interested to come on board or to participate in the team. It's been a great learning experience to collaborate with colleagues from right across the tertiary sector. So the course will be finalised by the end of the year, and the intention is to launch the course in the spring of 2024 in alignment with the National Charter. We're going on the roadshow with this symposium, so next week we'll be in Maynooth. Our workshop will be on the 9th of May. So again, it will be very engaging to be in a similar room, maybe not as big a room because we'll have parallel sessions, but to gather more further feedback that will feed into the project. So everything you've contributed today will feed into the improvement and the design of the training supports. I've just put up here on screen, and you can talk to us throughout the day, just our contact emails. If you have any further thoughts, points, questions that you want to bring back to us, please feel free to contact any of one of the four of us or all of us with your feedback. We'd very much welcome that. And so now we're on to the favourite part of the day, questions and answers, and just to give an opportunity for any queries or questions people might have, and I think there's going to be a roving mic available if people have any queries or questions, and we'll try and address those as they arise.
So good morning everyone. I'm really delighted to be here today and to introduce the next presentation, Implementing UDL, the Benefits and the Barriers, Listening to the Voice of Faculty and Staff. Faculty and staff across Atlantic Technological University who completed the UDL digital badge were invited to a focus group session to share their experience with UDL. Utilising an online questionnaire to guide the focus group discussion, participants shared the ways UDL was implemented, the benefits and the barriers. And the following presentation is a synopsis of the focus group sessions and guidelines for moving forward with UDL. And I would now like to invite and welcome to the podium Cathy O'Kelly, lecturer in the School of Business and Social Sciences at ATU Sligo, and Jeanette Kilroy, lecturer in UDL and the lead for the Path 4 initiative in developing an academic programme for ID students at ATU.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I appreciate that. As Amanda said, my name is Jeanette Kilroy, and I'm here with Kathy O'Kelly. We're going to go through our presentation today. So just a bit of our overview of what we're doing today. There we go. So we're going to spend the day first talking about our research, how we designed the research of the focus group research. We're going to talk about the findings in terms of the research, and then we're going to end with some of the recommendations that came out with the research. So, an introduction to our research. So, our research was part of our ATU UDL steering group to identify some of the barriers implementing UDL in higher education. And we want to thank the National Forum for funding of this project. So what we did is we invited we developed an academic focus group to identify some of the barriers from UDL. And we invited people who had already been doing UDL, who had taken the digital badge. So there were individuals who are both staff and both faculty across the ATU. Just a little bit about the design. We did it over Microsoft Teams. Each time we did this, we did a focus group. It was 1 hour, approximately 1 hour. And we had, again, ATU faculty and staff. We had about 10 participants, and we divided them into 2 sessions. So we started using an online questionnaire, Padlet, as you see up there. And then that gave the participants time to kind of write down their thoughts, and it allowed them for some kind of reflection before we had a discussion. Our goal was to come up with these themes. What UDL implementation are you already doing that has been successful? What are some of the benefits that you are seeing in UDL implementation? And what are some of the benefits that the students are seeing in UDL implementation? What are some of the barriers that you're seeing? And what are some of the recommendations that you would have as faculty and staff? So just briefly, we used Padlet. Here were the questions that were asked, and each time we asked one question, did some discussion parts of that, so it gave each person an opportunity to reflect. So the first question was just, how have you implemented UDL principles in your teaching practice? So we got lots of information and lots of feedback on those parts of that. The second one was, what impact did you see on the learning and outcomes of students and the learning experience of students? What were some of the obstacles that you came across in implementing UDL? And what can the institution do to make it a better learning experience for students? So here are some of the findings. First one is really just, what were some of the things that faculty and staff were doing in implementing UDL? We took the information and we broke it down into kind of the UDL themes. So some of the things that people said they were doing, these were either on the Padlet or they were in the discussion, is lots of folks were taking information, breaking it down into chunks for students. They were integrating a catch-up day in class for assignments. They increased student feedback in their day-to-day. And then one person had written down that they had used Lego models to understand complex molecular biology theories. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So it's kind of some of the things that folks were doing for engagement. And this was just a sampling. There was quite a bit more. But in terms of time, we just picked out a few items. Representation. There's a lot of examples of how people were implementing UDL in terms of representing materials. A lot of people were doing like audio and written feedback, encouraging students to engage in the material before class, so having those online materials prior to the class discussion, and then again, having some of those materials that were in different formats so that the students would have different ways to engage in materials. Videos, some of the lecture materials, and using things like closed captions. So some of the things that were quite easy to change in terms of the way information was represented. And then finally, action and expression. There were quite a few ideas that faculty were mentioning in terms of action and expression. So we talked, some of the faculty talked about using like a rubric for assessment, being able to do, there's quite a bit of discussion on being able to give open submission dates, which I thought was really interesting. We had quite a good discussion about open submission dates. Redesigning assessment, allowing students different ways to express what they've learned. That seems to be something that a lot of faculty and staff were doing. And then varying types of assessment and giving students choice on which assessment model they would prefer to use. Benefits of UDL. So then the next question from the Padlet was, what did they see as the benefit or the student, how did that improve students' experience with learning, and what did they see as some of the benefits? What we did is we chunked some of these into some specific areas. Looking at student empowerment, that topic came up quite a bit. Students appreciated being able to demonstrate learning in a model that was preferable to them. They also felt empowered by having the flexibility in terms of assessment and being able to make their own decisions and not feeling restricted. Student engagement, so that allowed students to engage with some of the materials and gave them some different opportunities and different ways to engage with material. And then it helped. Also, one of the other things that came up is it provided opportunities and learners to enhance creativity. Another piece that came up that I thought was interesting is that one person had mentioned in a particular assignment, it actually increased student overall and performance. So those were 3 of the areas, and then the other 2 was enthusiasm. So in looking at some of the benefits from UDL, it's not only just the enthusiasm of the students for the materials, but also the enthusiasm of staff to engage and to present the material. One person mentioned shifting from PowerPoint presentation to work-style tutorials makes the skills taught more relevant to the students. And then the last piece, which is something that we found very interesting, was that it developed, some of the things required in the courses were mirroring also what would be required in a workplace environment. So looking at some of those things of how to reflect and evaluate themselves, and then allowing students to work on their own goals. So those were some of the benefits that were mentioned in our focus group sessions. All right, I'm going to hand this over now to Kathy, and she will talk about some of the barriers in our focus group.
Thank you, Jeanette. Hello, everybody. This is the juicy bit now. We get to talk about the barriers and what we can fix. So, looking at it from a student point of view, again, we tried to summarise the information that we received from people. It was a challenge for students moving out of their comfort zone. So again, you have, the mention earlier on about the leaving cert. You have a lot of students coming in from a second level system that maybe is very prescriptive in terms of how they're expected to be assessed. So a lot of the things that people would hear from students, it's like they're not used to having a choice. They're afraid. There's a risk. They're used to rote learning, give it back. So when they're provided with all this choice, it can be a little bit overwhelming for them. And it's very, very important that trust is built up between the lecturers and the students, and that the system works in the favour of trying to implement UDL. For that reason, a lot of students went to the traditional assessment methods. So they're given all this choice. What would you like to do? You have this choice. You can do it this way or this way or this way. What would you like? And they'll go to the one that they did maybe, for the last 10 years. So in my mind, it's a little bit like saying to somebody, would you like a cappuccino, a latte, a macchiato, whatever? And they go, I'll have tea. I've always had tea, I'll have tea. And it can be very disappointing, but you understand where the students are coming from. So sometimes we found the more confident students, they were the ones who were willing to embrace alternative assessments. So you have to reach out to everybody. You have to make sure that you're including everybody, and that there are some people that might be more willing to take the risk for various reasons, and there are others that you might need to encourage a little bit more. In terms of feedback, Some students were not accessing feedback. So again, a lot of lecturers expressed that they put a lot of time and effort into providing feedback for the students, and all the students are interested in is the grade. So I think a lot of people can relate to that, where they're going, what's the grade, what do I need to do next? And the feedback can be lost. The other thing that's mentioned, the language barriers. You know, that educational speech is not always understood by students. So Aileen mentioned earlier on about having a shared language. That's very, very important. So a lot of the themes that we identified in the focus groups, it's a lot of the discussion that's at our table there, you know, in relation to what needs to be looked at and what needs to be addressed. So the next one then, from the staff point of view, and bear in mind, our focus groups were with staff. So we got the barriers for students from the staff point of view. We didn't specifically asked the students, but that was the experience of the people who participated. So some of the things that were barriers for staff, the assessments being, you know, you have to follow the module descriptor, it's tied to the approved programme schedule, so that can limit your flexibility in terms of what you can do for assessment. So you have all of these lovely things you can do, but you can wait till the next programmatic review in a few years' time before you can actually do anything about it. So that was frustrating for staff. Mairead mentioned earlier on about time poverty. That came up a lot. Lecturers thinking, what can I do in the time available? You have to be realistic. You have a semester, the job has to get done, you know, you have to work within those limits. If you're providing a range of different alternatives for students, you need rubrics to match each one. So you can see where it's tempting for lecturers to go, well, I have one assignment, one essay, one rubric, that's it. Why would you want to provide 3 or 4? It's a lot of extra work, so that's where the time is an issue. And there was mention about, you know, by providing these alternatives and opening up the discussion, you might uncover learning challenges that the lecturer, even the student, might not be aware of, and the lecturer might not feel they're able to support. So again, you know, you're going into unknown territory there. Some people, because this wasn't just faculty, it was, you know, all staff working in different areas, and people mentioned that there can be a pushback from people who are not engaged in UDL because they feel that it's just something extra and the time isn't available and it's taking on extra work you cannot do. Semesterisation was mentioned, so where students had 6 exams in a year, now they have 12. So it's just like, you know, running to the clock all the time, and as somebody said, you just put in more hurdles. So in one aspect, you have all these aspirations of the fabulous things you can do, and then you put in all the things that prevent you from doing it. So there needs to be a bit of joined up thinking there. A lot of students are very assessment driven. So if they're looking at what do I need to do, what grades can I get, and you have to spend time discussing that with them, and that can, again, you know, eat into time. Some students, they just want to get the, you know, tick the box and move on. They want to get finished college. Like some students even are going, how soon can I get out of here? You know, they're not looking at the educational experience. So again, that's something that we need to be aware of. What works with one group might not work with another group. So you can have a fantastic experience one year with a group of students and they love all the alternatives, and then you go, that's brilliant, I'll do it again next year, and it doesn't appeal to that group. So you have to be constantly evolving and changing, you know, with the students that you have in front of you. Someone mentioned UDL is not what we're teaching students. We're concentrating on our own disciplines. So if you're a lecturer in science, you're teaching about science. You're not teaching about UDL. So sometimes alternatives can be seen as putting more work on the students rather than actually trying to help them, so that you're overburdening them. The VLE platforms, one mentioned, again, we had discussion with that at the table, and it'd be interesting to see what comes out of today's workshop and how it aligns with what we have found out. But it was like the need for consistency, for example, in Moodle pages and having templates, but then some people felt that lacks flexibility and it'd be hard to make it exciting. So where's the middle ground there, where you have to have quality and consistency? You can't have so much academic freedom that the students can't, you know, follow what's going on. And also the issue that, you know, students might not navigate around your Moodle page the way you think they will, and you need to be aware of that. So here are some quotes. There was a lot of discussion about the lower pass grades, that if the pass rates are reduced more and standards are reduced, that's a concern for staff. And also about being constantly given new modules to deliver. So if you're trying to do something and you're passionate about it, and then you develop something lovely, and the next year it's like, guess what, you're not teaching it. You have to go and start all over again. That was a, you know, constant theme. So here are some direct quotes from people. We keep getting people to teach stuff which is not their core. If we taught our core and we're passionate about that, we teach, and why we're teaching it and why it's important to students. So don't ask somebody in business to teach something that you know, relates to a different discipline or something that they're not familiar with. It can cause a problem. So many people come in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and they're throwing something which really is not their thing. And then someone added, yeah, usually the week before or the day before you're going into the classroom. So they are the realistic obstacles that, you know, people, we're all very clear that this happens. So in terms of recommendations, for institutional support, allow more flexibility for people to change assessments, as someone said, on the hoof. Deal with what, you know, what's happening at the moment and allow some flexibility if possible. The deadlines were mentioned in terms of if it's possible to provide flexibility with deadlines, where it's appropriate, you could consider doing that. Make UDL part of the culture of the institution so that students become familiar with it. Aileen, you mentioned that again. You know, make it part of, we all know what's going on here and what we're trying to achieve. It's the culture of the organisation. Encourage all staff to incorporate UDL into their professional practice and provide time to incorporate that. Okay? And the people who do it, acknowledge them. The people who, you know, participate in UDL activities, because a lot of things to date have been done on a voluntary basis. So from a student engagement point of view, if you want students to embrace all these alternatives, help them. Provide them with quality examples of previous student work, or, you know, give them resources, for example, templates maybe, that they can see how they could actually work with this alternative assessment if it isn't something they've experienced before. Help them in relation to feedback and the understanding of the importance of feedback and how it will help them and how they can implement that. So how can they receive the feedback and not see it as criticism? See it as something that will help them to, you know, progress and to develop, and that they understand that, and how can they implement it and then, you know, build on their education. Provide supports to students who may need, you know, learning supports. So make sure that we do what we say we're doing. If students need supports, well then put that there and don't have so much bureaucracy that it's difficult for them to access. If you can link the UDL activities to the students' career aspirations, that would be very valuable. And also someone, you know, the discussion came up about incorporating peer assessment in, so to develop integrity. So allow the students to kind of, you know, police it themselves. The last little bit here is on resources and training. So have a UDL support group and provide and allocate time for activities such as a lunch and learn. There are UDL support groups. There are activities like lunch and learn. People can't get to them because of timetable restrictions and everything else that's going on. So value it, give it an allocated time and free people up that they can participate in it. UDL practitioners, so the people in this room and all the people around the country who have ideas and have templates and that, they could share them with the teaching and learning departments so that there's a bank of resources. Don't reinvent the wheel. So there's a lot of good information out there. Pool that and then let people choose from it. Consider the physical environment, so to maximise creativity and accessibility. There are examples, like a lot of people come in here today and went, wow, the room is lovely, it's bright. You know, like, look at the physical space you're in and does it work for what you need it to do. Have additional training at staff induction on things like Ally and MS, Microsoft Immersive Reader, to demonstrate how they can support learning and follow up afterwards, because if someone is new to a role, they need to be introduced to that, but they'll get so much information, provide more follow up for them afterwards. Have resources on how to encourage students to become more of an active versus a passive learner. So it was mentioned earlier on at our table, the students need to take responsibility for this too. They need to be engaged in their learning. So, you know, it should be a partnership, and that becomes part of the culture of the organisation, and provide additional training for supporting students with learning difficulties. So on a positive note, there's just a few little things that I want to mention that Jeanette mentioned earlier on about the Lego. So I have it on a piece of paper here, but I have two colleagues here today. They have got you know, there's a follow-up project on an NTutor student partnership project on developing a molecular biology educational toolkit using Lego. So you'll probably hear more about that hopefully at the UDL conference next year. So there are good things coming out of it. There's another NTutor project which is based on connections and entrepreneurial initiative, trying to bring, you know, sort of external experts in and opening it up campus-wide so that everybody can get information in different ways outside of the classroom. We have UDL champions who are here in the room today, again, as part of that NTutor funding, and that's very, very important as well. So we are seeing where funding is being put in place. We need more of that, and that's a lot of what was coming through in the message. And in relation to Orla Flynn, what she mentioned earlier on about the importance of the strategic plan and provide tools and resources to help implementation of UDL, it doesn't matter how much goodwill you have. If it's not in the strategic plan, if it's not seen as being important, and if it's not resourced, it isn't going to happen. So that is where our presentation ends, and if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Kathy and Jeanette. It was really, really interesting to hear the results of your research on the staff's experiences of UDL, but more importantly as well, I think you've given us plenty of food for thought on how to build that culture of inclusion in higher education as well. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions maximum, so is there anybody who would like to ask a question?
Yeah, so I'm Ellen McCabe from ATU, and I was just wondering, did in your research the issue of gender come up at all? Because just when you're talking about recognition and time and kind of people giving up their time freely, just like from a very quick glance around the room, it's like seems very female heavy, the involvement in UDL, and I was just wondering if that was something that came up at all.
I would say that the focus groups were female heavy.
It's interesting, and it was mentioned earlier on, someone said to me, look around the room, and there is that element that you cannot ignore. So I think you may have touched on an area for further research, Ellen. I think watch that space for sure, yeah. But it didn't come up in the focus groups. But I suppose the focus groups, we had very clear questions, and that didn't come into it. But then, in a way, there's a lot of things people don't want to talk about now. Yeah. It's like we'd steer away from that, so they don't necessarily want to go down that route. So thanks for bringing it up. I look forward to your research.
Paul Nolan from ATU. I was struck by you saying that students don't use the VLE page as you think they will. Would it be good to be able to get a heat map of how your UDL page was used at the end of a year, so you'd actually go, okay, they never went near that tile that I thought was really important?
Yeah, I've done that. It can be a fabulous experience. And sometimes it's the list of, so when you come looking to me, and when I'm explaining to you the fact that you never logged on to the Moodle page, you know, like there's varying levels of activity, but that did come up where people are going, we need to think more like the students. You know, we need to think from their point of view. So it's not like what we think they want, it's what they actually want. And someone mentioned that earlier on today, that they're trying to, they're trying to kind of understand more what the students need. And the students don't necessarily know themselves. So that's another area we need to work on.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so I'll hand you back over to Dr. Niamh Plunkett, and I'm sure that Kathy and Jeanette will be willing to answer any questions and have a good discussion over coffee break. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the introduction. Niamh, don't normally use the full title, but thanks all the same. I just want to say before I start, I'm delighted to chair the upcoming theme, which is around student empowerment, representing the Student Union President, Darragh Martin, who can't be here today, and just offering some insights from a student standpoint. I'd just like to also say I was in the room here yesterday evening, and there was a couple of people who were setting up and speaking here today. And as somebody who works with student representatives, it's really nice to see how passionate people are, and the enthusiasm in the room yesterday evening was lovely. Seeing Mairead McCann was here, and Cathy O'Kelly and a few other people. So, given the limited time available, I would like to briefly highlight the role the Students' Union play in the UDL process. Furthermore, I will provide a couple of illustrative examples of stuff that we have implemented in ATU Sligo to help bridge the gap between student engagement and student empowerment. So I'm going to start with advocacy, the engine that powers student representation. We're here to ensure that every student has a voice. We're here to that their interests are reflected in university policy, and like any good student organisation, we would knock on a lot of doors to ensure that the interests of our members are heard. Thankfully at ATU Sligo, a lot of those doors are wide open to us. We're not just advocates, we're champions for an inclusive learning environment that benefits every student. Feedback is not only important, it's essential. Who better knows the impact of UDL than the students themselves? We at the Students' Union have worked closely with Niamh, Mooring and Shelley to encourage the student body to provide feedback to assess effectiveness of UDL measures. As part of this continual feedback loop, it's a pulsating circle of improvement that keeps the heart of UDL beating and thriving within our university. There's nothing quite as magical as peer-to-peer communication, and we look forward to working with the InTutor project in the coming year. It's direct, it's honest, and it's effective. To raise awareness of UDL, we have worked closely with the UDL team. Our goal, to cultivate a university-wide culture that cherishes and promotes inclusive learning environments. As student representatives, we're a colourful mosaic of diversity ourselves. Our strength lies in our diversity. We're here to advocate for everyone, students with disabilities, neurodivergent students, international students, and students from varying socioeconomic backgrounds and more. We stand for a learning environment as diverse and inclusive as the members we represent. UDL isn't a one-person show, it's a group performance. As student representatives, we work hand in hand with faculty and administration to implement UDL. We're active members of committees and task forces centred around UDL. We don't just preach UDL, we practice it. From accessible meetings and inclusive events to varied modes of communication, we accommodate different learning styles and preferences. Our approach, show, don't tell. Since the onset of the pandemic, we've started recording every interaction we have with our members. We've opened up new avenues of communication and engagement. This has allowed us a more thorough handover between one officer group and the next. I'm just going to give a couple of quick examples of stuff that we've implemented in the last number of years. In late 2021, the Students' Union was facing low student engagement, disappointing election turnouts, in addition to a difficulty in recruiting student reps. The question had to be asked, if we're failing in the aforementioned, are we really representing our members at all? The need for reform was apparent, and we had a golden opportunity. With ATU designation date approaching, a constitutional referendum was required to rebrand from IT Sligo Student Union at the time to ATU Sligo Student Union. This process had to take place before April 2022. We understood, however, that this alone wouldn't boost engagement. Instead, we seized on the opportunity to overhaul the organisation, aiming to significantly improve our student representation and engagement in less than 100 days. Collaboration with an international expert in union affairs, TU colleagues such as TUD, MTU and TUS, and most importantly our own members, outlined a path to transformation. We employed multiple consultation tools, including class reps consultative forum, student consultative review groups, and regular newsletters, surveys and feedback sessions where students could directly suggest what they wanted their new SU to be. This process led to a new constitution that redefined the students' interaction with the Students' Union. We established a student senate which had not existed before. We restructured our class rep system, broadened the scope of the full-time sabbatical officers, and replaced what many students seen as redundant part-time roles with new roles that spoke to them. The results were astounding, with 97.5% of people supporting our new constitution. Historically, one of our key metrics for measuring student engagement was voter turnout, which, as I mentioned, had been pretty dismal up until that point. However, drawing on our consultation from the previous year, we decided to shift focus to making the election process more accessible and eliminating barriers to running for office. To further improve accessibility, we moved our entire nomination process online, as we had done so with our voting system in 2021. The introduction of new officer roles designed by our members themselves led to an influx of 22 candidates putting their name forward for election, up from 9 the previous year. Our re-envisioned approach delivered a more diverse array of candidates for all 9 positions, including full-time officers who had not previously served on the union executive. The cherry on top, and an unexpected positive outcome, was the highest voter turnout we had in student union history, with 1,806 students casting their vote, up from 450 2 years previously. These results stand testament to the profound effect of student empowerment. I'm delighted now to introduce Maureen Harron, lecturer in UDL and also academic lead at the newly established UDL Centre for Excellence at ATU. Presenting with Maureen is Dr. Shelley Brady, Disability Officer at ATU Sligo, and like Maureen, also a member of the ATU UDL Working Group. The title of the presentation is Underpinning Genuine Student Partnerships, Starting the Conversation of Engagement, Representation and Action. Just to remind you, Maureen and Shelley, you have possibly less than 18 minutes now, but I went on and on for ages. And we'll take a couple of questions from the audience at the end.
Thanks very much, Don, for agreeing to help us out today and for giving us the student perspective as well. I'm Maureen Harron, and as Don has mentioned, I am working in the UDL Centre of Excellence here in ATU Sligo. Our presentation is entitled Underpinning Genuine Partnerships. Just move that forward, sorry. Ta-da. starting the conversation of engagement, representation, and action. Our focus today is on equitable learning, student empowerment, and creating a sustainable partnership with our students. This project is funded by the National Forum for Enhancement Teaching and Learning under the Satchel funding. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so this year, Shelley and I wanted to go a little bit wider. Last year, a lot of you would have been here last year and would have remembered that I presented on focus groups based on students' experiences of staff who would have completed the UDL digital badge. So this year we thought we needed to go a little bit deeper with our engagement with students. That was just kind of a scratch the surface research initiative. So we set out to answer the following burning questions that we had. What did we need to learn? Why did we need to learn it? How are we going to approach this? What will the response be? What does it tell us? And where do we go from here? So we devised a survey for all students across the ATU, and we sought to learn what our students know about equitable learning and student empowerment. And as Shelley will tell us in a little while, we had an overwhelming response. So the first thing we wanted to learn was, what do our students know about equitable learning? The results of this part of the survey question will be revealed when Shelley takes us through the survey. But what is the context of equitable learning, and what does the research tell us? So this slide here is from the HEA. Some of you might be familiar with the content of this slide. So equity of access to higher education is a fundamental principle of Irish education policy and priority for the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, and the Higher Education Authority. People should have equity of access to education, independent of their socioeconomic background, ethnicity, gender, geographical location, disability, or other circumstances. Equity in education means ensuring that every student has an equal opportunity to achieve their potential, and that any social or economic constraints that might prevent a student from having equal opportunities are mitigated. Equitable learning refers to an educational approach that ensures fairness, inclusivity, and equal opportunities for all students to learn and succeed. It recognizes that students come from diverse backgrounds and have different abilities, needs, and circumstances. The goal of equitable learning is to address and overcome the barriers that can limit educational outcomes for certain groups of students, such as those based on race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, or language proficiency. This moves away from the equity of access toward applying access in the curriculum and implementing equal opportunities within the classroom. So here are some key principles and strategies associated with equitable learning. Inclusive practices. So this includes respecting and valuing different cultures, perspectives, and learning styles. Access to resources and technology. This prevents disparities and allows students to engage in meaningful and relevant experiences. Culturally responsive teaching. This approach acknowledges and values students' cultural assets and helps them see themselves reflected in the learning process. Collaboration and community partnerships, that kind of speaks for itself. Data-informed decision-making, so this is kind of more along the lines of learning analytics. This data-driven approach helps educators make informed decisions and implement targeted interventions to support all learners. Professional development. This helps educators develop the skills and knowledge needed to develop the diverse needs of their student. Elimination of bias. This includes addressing implicit biases, stereotypes, and discriminatory practices to create a fair and unbiased learning environment. I would add an 8th to this list, and that is decolonizing the curriculum. Decolonizing the curriculum in academia requires meaningful recognition of alternative perspectives embedded in analysis of power relations, including those of race, class, and gender. The decolonization of the curriculum is driven by the understanding that traditional educational systems have often perpetuated a limited and biased view of history, culture, and knowledge, primarily focusing on Eurocentric perspectives and neglecting the contributions and perspectives of marginalized groups, Indigenous peoples, and colonized regions. Now that I've expanded on this context, Shelley will expand on student empowerment and the results of our student survey.
Thanks, Maureen, and hello, everybody. So, when we talk about student empowerment, we're really defining it as bringing into a state of belief one's ability to act effectively. It's really closely related to self-efficacy and that belief that we have autonomy, we have control over our lives, and the ability to create positive changes as a result of our actions. It's very closely linked also to self-identity, so how individuals understand and label themselves. Empowered individuals are able to consider varied perspectives, negotiate with others, think independently, make their own decisions based on the relevant information, and act on knowledge. And when we're able to exhibit or use these behaviours, it creates a world which is much richer, deeper, messier, and more complex. And the ability of an individual to be able to actively engage or be empowered is really a civic right, and it's a responsibility. And in fact, it's the very essence of democracy which benefits us all. So we often in education, we talk about that transition between compliance and engagement, where we create an environment where students want to learn as opposed to feeling that they have to. And just, I suppose, a little bit of nuance here, compliance and engagement, they're not bad things. We need students to comply at times. So for example, when the fire alarm goes off, we want them and we need them to comply. Similarly, engagement is something that can be really effective and enjoyable for our students. But often students sort of remain in that space between compliance and engagement. So to really encourage that self-directive, creative learner, we need to move towards empowerment and have them own their learning. Empowered learners are motivated and competent, and by empowering our students, we're equipping them with the foundations needed to become great leaders, learners, and citizens. So the research has shown that empowerment is predicted by equitable power use by teachers, positive teacher-student relationships, and a sense of community within the classroom. Highly empowered students report better grades, fewer behavioural incidences, increased extracurricular participation, and higher educational aspirations than students who are less empowered. So they have belief and they have hope. And I think at this time it's a good idea to look at the mission statement we have at ATU Sligo. This is in the absence of an overarching mission statement which is coming for the ATU, but looking across the other mission statements across the campuses, the sentiments are very similar. So advancing economic, social and environmental sustainability through education, innovation and engagement, producing graduates who are innovative, confident and capable of leading the development of the region and beyond. So all of these attributes our graduates need can be encouraged and provided through empowerment. So empowerment needs to be a philosophy of education to which we must be consciously committed and pervasive, or else it will be ineffectual. And I suppose it's really important to remember this isn't always easy. These shifts are not easy. And the journey towards student empowerment, it can feel confusing and scary, but if we wait for permission, it may never happen. And sometimes we just have to take that leap. Which brings me to our student survey. So we really wanted to learn, give voice and empower our students in understanding their understanding of equitable learning, student empowerment and the barriers that they experience. And this was kindly endorsed by Dara Martin, our Students' Union President.
Hi all, Dara Martin here from the Students' Union, and I'm just letting you know that the Student Empowerment Questionnaire is now open and we all invite you to take part in it. It's a chance to have your voice heard, which as an officer is something that we've obviously been advocating for a long time, and it's great that you have this opportunity. So no matter your background, no matter your where you're from, what year you're in or what course you're doing, we encourage you to take part. There's prizes to be won, but most importantly it's a great way to have the authentic student voice heard. It's a great way to have the student experience looked at as a whole. It's a great way to reimagine student accessibility in higher education. So please take part and have your voice heard.
So thank you to Dara again for doing that for us. So we're not sure if it was a result of Dara's endorsement or the promise of potentially winning a hoodie, but we had a huge response. We had 595 students that responded across all of our campuses, which was just fantastic. We looked at this, it was 71% on campus of respondents and 29% of students were online, broken further down into 81% undergraduate, 16% postgrad and 4% apprentices. 81% had never heard of equitable learning, which was really interesting. And those who had, however, did have a grasp of the sentiment of what equitable learning is. So for example, yes, distributing support and academic resources on the basis of need as opposed to blanket equality. When we looked into student empowerment, we broke it down into 5 subsets. So we looked at academically, I feel that I can make decisions and I'm part of actions in the classroom. Physically, I feel that I can meet the physical demands of my course and that the campus is accessible to me. Socially, I engage in university social activities and I have a college peer group that I connect with socially. Well-being and mental health, I feel that I can balance how I care for my well-being and mental health and my studies. And culturally, I feel students from diverse cultural backgrounds, particularly recently arrived immigrant and refugee students and their families, feel welcomed, accepted, safe and valued. So 77% of our students that responded feel academically empowered. 70% feel physically empowered. 58% feel socially empowered. 60% feel empowered with regards to their well-being and mental health. And 65% of the respondents felt empowered culturally. It's really important to note that when we asked students to tell us more, 47% of them felt that there were no barriers in place for them, which is a really great reflection on the wonderful practice that is already in place across the ATU. But the feedback that we did get, we looked in across all the different subsets. So socially, we looked at data, actually, we saw there was a clear separation between the feedback between social empowerment between online students and on-campus students. So 51% of online students felt there were social barriers, whereas 0.06% of our on-campus students felt this to be the case. So comments from students were as follows. No one has cameras on in online learning lectures. We don't get to see who we're learning with. We don't feel like we're building a student relationship. While there is good support for and between online student groups, we do still miss out on certain events that aren't streamed. While I appreciate the benefits of online education, I find the pace at times to be overwhelming and would prefer more opportunities for interaction with my peers. And online is difficult to engage with other students on my course, and geographically the campus and other facilities are not available to me. Physically, we had 0.02% felt that there were barriers, but this is no less valuable as I suppose we are representing a minority. Lifts are often broken, canteen is hard to navigate, the library is difficult to navigate, wheelchair bathrooms are usually closed, and certain areas just overall inaccessible to physically disabled students, including areas where social and sports societies meet. And I hope that in the future an exam hall could be made available in the Midlands. A shorter trip to Athlone or Mullingar would be beneficial. Culturally, 0.01% of students felt there were barriers, and some examples of feedback where food in the canteen does not meet cultural needs, and barriers to inclusion for students from diverse backgrounds, not due to prejudice, but due to lack of consideration for people from other cultures, backgrounds, etc., and how they may be adversely affected by assuming a norm of an Irish white male background. Academically, 11% of our respondents felt there were barriers there, and the main themes revolved around course demand and workload and assessment. So for my course, a lot of the assignments and performance tend to pile up sometimes and make it difficult to balance at times. And academically, I feel that students that fall short in certain areas should have the ability to choose what to submit so that it suits them, rather than the final submission exams only suiting some while others have a hard time passing. Finally, mental health and well-being, and arguably most importantly, we had 15% that felt there were barriers in this area, and the main themes were cost of living, course demands, and access to counselling services. The high cost of living is the main barrier of having good mental health. Balancing my studies and mental health is a barrier for me personally. It ends up leaving me less confident in my ability, which in hand causes lower grades than my ability. It would be more helpful to have more counselling appointments available. It seems there's always a backlog for appointments, or even if there were trained mental health first aiders or ambassadors. I feel that my mental health is being drained as I go to school weekdays, work weekends, and help manage a farm when I can. I don't get much time to rest. I feel that if I go through a difficult period, that I'm not comfortable missing classes or missing days of school for mental health, as I wouldn't be able to catch up afterwards. And this is the reality for so many of our students. So what are we doing, and what can be done to empower our students? I'm going to hand back to Maureen. Thank you.
Okay, so it's just a natural word that comes to mind, and it's a very popular buzzword, is sustainability. So the UN Sustainable Development Goal 4 is the educational goal, and it tells us when it comes to education that the aim is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all. And more specifically, by 2030, ensure access for all people to affordable and quality technical, vocational and tertiary education, including university. So how do we make a start at this? So the NTutor program will help build this partnership foundation. So for those who don't know, NTutor is Ireland's technological sector combining new technological universities and institutes of technology, formed a partnership to develop and deliver on the National Technological University Transformation of Recovery and Resilience, or NTutor. As part of this project, 100 student champions have been recruited across the TUs to learn and develop skills in one of the key priority areas in addition to developing leadership, collaboration, and communication. This is a fixed-term NTutor student champion role for a period that extends from June 2023 to May 2024, and each student champion will receive an award valued at €3,000. The role of the NTutor student champion is to develop student engagement and empowerment in their local university or institute. Student champions will engage with the development of an initiative under one of the NTutor thematic areas. So that's either academic integrity, digital transformation in teaching and learning, education for sustainability, employability, EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, or universal design for learning, or UDL. So the NTutor ATU UDL student champions will work with the UDL Centre of Excellence throughout the next academic year to create a UDL digital badge for and with students. The focus of this collaboration is empowering the student voice, and these students will co-create this content of this badge. So a successful exemplar of a student badge is the academic writing digital badge. This badge has had widespread use across programs and modules and is available for all students. In 2020, our colleague Aoife Murray, the academic writing instructor, and her team created the academic writing digital badge. The program is designed to develop the academic writing skills of all students at ATU Sligo. The program is divided into units, each unit addressing a key topic in academic writing. Whether you are new or returning student, writing at third level, or are looking to improve your skills, this program is relevant. Each unit contains content, practice activities, downloadable resources, and a final quiz to check your understanding. And students must complete all elements of the unit to achieve completion. Still not getting it right. Okay, this is a self-directed, interactive course designed to develop academic writing skills at third level. There's a flexible approach. The program is divided into 7 units, and how the program works is that you click on each unit and that you wish to study. Many of you would have done the UDL digital badge. It's very much a similar platform. Parameters have been set with clever thinking and that the student must fully complete the content and achieve a pass rate of 80%. Many of our colleagues across the ATU have taken this content and actually embedded it into their Moodle page. So students that need those, those basic foundational writing skills have access to that. And they've offered, many have offered kind of a breakdown in points that are awarded to students and able to complete that. So this program, as I said, was developed by the Academic Writing Centre, but it is a really good example and can be mirrored with our student champions and what we can do to create a UDL digital badge for students. It is, however, in emphasizing student agency, students will be a part of the co-creation of this content and will be encouraged to voice their perspectives, ask questions of their peers, and contribute to the co-creation of knowledge. Actually, I have to go to this one first. Okay, this is a short excerpt from Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk relating to running education systems from the basis of educating learners out of creative capacities due to the fear of being wrong.
My contention is all kids have tremendous talents and we squander them pretty ruthlessly. I had a great story recently, I love telling it, of a little girl who was in a drawing lesson. She was 6 and she was at the back drawing, and the teacher said this little girl hardly ever paid attention. And in this drawing lesson she did. And the teacher was fascinated. She went over to her and she said, "What are you drawing?" And the girl said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But nobody knows what God looks like." And the girl said, "They will in a minute." Kids will take a chance. If they don't know, they'll have a go. Am I right? They're not frightened of being wrong. Now, I don't mean to say that being wrong is the same thing as being creative. What we do know is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. If you're not prepared to be wrong. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost that capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. And we run our companies this, by the way. We stigmatize mistakes. And we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities. If you think of it, the whole system of public education around the world is a protracted process of university entrance. And the consequence is that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. And I think we can't afford to go on that way. Picasso once said this. He said that all children are born artists. The problem is to remain an artist as we grow up. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely, and the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are, and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. I think that's very powerful. And apart from that, he is actually landing on sustainability as well. So what we're doing now has a very long impact. So educators must realize their role in this process and acquaint themselves with empowerment strategies to implement in both their classrooms and in the curriculum. The challenge is for us to educate in creative capacities. The UDL framework allows for this flexibility. Ken Robinson tells us the creative capacity is a mindset that allows you to tap into your own wellspring of creative thought, not just through the arts, but as an approach to life. This is what it is meant in seeing our students for the hope that they are. The impact of empowerment can be nurtured in the classroom, but has implications that will extend far beyond it. Who can tell me what UX stands for? And Frederick, I see you're here. I'm borrowing some of your very good work in that regard. So our good friend and fellow presenter here today, Assistant Professor Frederick Fauvier, published an article which relates to what Shelley and I present to you here today. Frederick discusses the student user experience and notes that part of the reflection that needs to occur within the UDL movement around power will inevitably lead to a reconsideration of how UDL implementation should occur. The strategic implementation of UDL across campuses has thus far strikingly ignored students as stakeholders. It will be impossible to promote UDL on campuses if a significant effort is not made to involve the student body as a stakeholder. This involvement could take the shape of workshops and information sessions, but will need to eventually grow in scope. It will require the involvement of student unions and will eventually need to incorporate full and informal consultation of the student body in order to identify campus-specific variables that need to be taken into account in the way UDL is unrolled. We are in agreement with Frederick, but we add to what he proposes, and that we also argue that for initiatives such as this to have continued success, educators require the know-how to engage with students in this way. Student empowerment is crucial to the personal, intellectual, and educational growth of students. Educators must realize their role in this process and acquaint themselves with empowerment strategies to implement in both their classrooms and in the curriculum. They must also be aware of the correlation between their perceptions of their students and those students' academic success. Finally, in order for students to truly become empowered, the concept of empowerment must be seen as more than just another strategy for boosting academic success. It must be seen as a philosophy of education that can help students to be proactive in school as well as become productive members of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen and Shelley. We would like to open the floor for just a couple of questions. We're wildly over at this stage, so if anyone has any questions.
I wanted to ask about the barrier survey that you did, because I'm wondering, did you collect any demographic data there? You had 0.2% of students and 0.1% noting physical and cultural barriers. Do you know if the relevant students are actually being captured in that?
No, it was anonymous. It was anonymous.
With no demographic information at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. So it's an interesting idea to sort of think about, I suppose, if those relevant students are being considered within that. Yeah. No,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely it is. I suppose we wanted to get the whole student body, and with thinking about UDL and how it's for everybody and not just for students with disabilities, we didn't want to take that to, drill into that data, but that's absolutely something that needs to happen going forward, that we're getting that information from the relevant stakeholders. Completely agree.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Don. I'm delighted to chair this next team, which focuses on UDL in leadership. Opportunities and challenges in sustainable, inclusive learning in further and higher education. Our first presenter, Dr. Laura Lee, is not able to be here today. However, her colleague James Northridge is presenting on UCC's behalf. I'm delighted to welcome James, who is the Project Manager for Inclusive UCC. This project is focused on building on success of existing good practice in UDL and moving access, inclusion and diversity for the margins to the mainstream at the University College in Cork. This ambitious project aims to make UCC a digitally accessible and inclusive university for all. The title James is going to present today is Institutional Partnerships Towards Inclusion at UCC. Just to remind you, James, you have 8 minutes to present, leaving enough time for a couple of questions. Thank you.
So I think that Maureen stole a few minutes there, so I'll have to grab those back. But look, it's okay, I'm from Cork, I speak very quick. So that's so obviously my colleague Laura Lee is technically here in spirit. But it's great to have the opportunity to be here to talk to friends and colleagues. And I think at this stage, myself and Maureen often joke, we do a lot of over and back, and I almost deserve an ATU email address at this stage. Yeah. So I suppose just in terms of the time I have, what I wanted to do is just give a small sense to the work that we are doing in UCC, and how does leadership play into that. And in thinking about it, I was driving up last night, listening to a little bit of Brené Brown on the way. Vulnerability was important, obviously, for me. So it kind of got me thinking about vulnerability of our leaders, and what does that mean? And oftentimes we necessarily don't know everything, and that's okay. And I think sometimes when we think about UD and we think about UDL, we're often in that we're always talking about best practice. And I find it within my own institution and others that we refer to things as this is the best way it's done, and sometimes it puts some of our academics off, and we just have to be aware of that. And I suppose in terms of some of the work that Brenny talks about, it's that, perfectionism, it's progress over perfection, really, and how do we get onto that? So it's the small things, the small wins, it's the small things that our institutions can do, and it's the small things that our leaders can do. And our leaders, I suppose, need to be that little bit vulnerable in not knowing everything. And I think that's one of the core things that comes across for us. Again, for me, and hopefully this will get us thinking, it's one of those quotes that often comes to mind, like, do we really do better when we know better? And that's kind of a question, not to say that you have the answer to it right now, but undoubtedly there's times in this room, all of us don't do necessarily what we should do. Should I have sent my presentation a little bit earlier yesterday? Probably, but I didn't, and here we are. And I suppose the thing I'll say is that that's across the board for all our academics, and we work very closely with a lot of our academic colleagues. And there's a lot of workload on top of people, and we talk again about best practices, and we talk about the great things that UD and UDL can do, but it really is again about the small wins, and it's not always about doing better when we know better, but it's doing it most of the time. And I think it's just about being okay with not being perfect. That's kind of one of my core kind of messages. And that's certainly, we're really blessed, I suppose, in UCC to have really strong senior leadership. Our project sponsor is the registrar, Professor Stephen Byrne. Our president is very much behind the initiative and the drive. And it's small things on their side, okay? So they'll come to me and say, what's the best font I should put in an email? And that seems like a really simple thing, but in actual fact, that's them thinking about universal design. And it's just those small wins that we constantly kind of chip off. So I'm just going to play a short little video with our president.
Everything has changed. University College Cork is a campus-based university, so when we pivoted online, we lost a lot. There's been a different experience for students, there's been a different experience for staff. For some, it might have been better. We should also acknowledge that for some, it's been incredibly challenging. But our ambition and desire is to go back to a campus-based university with one caveat: have greater digital enrichment of what we're actually doing in university. As a professor of ecology, the central axiom in ecology is that diversity begets stability. We will only be successful in the future if we have diversity, and diversity in all its forms, in all its shapes, which we now will hope become embedded in the new world of University College Cork post-COVID, where we speak to our values of inclusivity, of respect, and we use whatever methodologies, pedagogies, and techniques that are evolving to position the best learning experience for our students and to build on the fantastic work that's gone on. As we've seen in the last 12 months, our world gets turned over every now and then, but we'll be ready at University College Cork, co-constructing with our students the best learning environment possible. We will ensure inclusivity in everything we do.
So I suppose for me, having worked in primary and secondary school education, dealing with students with disabilities, predominantly assistive technology was kind of a core area. One of the things we often would have seen was this whole idea of TWADI, and some people kind of know what I'm talking about. I see some people smiling, you know, and you go into the principal, vice principal, and TWADI was that comment that I always got back, right? It was always that this is TWADI, and undoubtedly I think we're still sort of in that area. We're in that's the way we've always did it, that's the way we've always done it, so goodness, why would we change? And we heard that this morning in terms of assessment. Like, we're doing phenomenal work, and I know Dara's leading in phenomenal work ahead in Universal Design for Learning, but I think that the one that's kind of falling behind in some instances is how do we move on the assessment piece. That is one of the biggest pieces, and I know it's one that we're tackling. But it's for all of us to, when we hear ourselves using that comment, you know, what are we going to do? What small thing can we do? And I find myself using this term more than I wish, but it's constantly to ask yourself why. You know, and we often teach as we were taught, you know, and it's just how do we move beyond that? How do we be the difference, I suppose? Just a really small piece in terms of the, I suppose, the history of UDL in UCC, and undoubtedly very, very rich history. Before UDL was something, it was something that we've been doing long before my time. In the year of my birth, actually, is when it started. I'll have you know, in '84, which is a great year. And I suppose there's been lots of things happen in UCC, and a lot of my close colleagues, you know, that have done really, really solid work across UD and nationally have been leading on it. And I'm just kind of delighted to kind of come in the footsteps of some of those people. But certainly I think what we've tried to do is instill it into everything that we do in terms of our teaching learning practice, in terms of our certifications. And I think what kind of highlights that more is how we really have been implementing Universal Design for Learning in everything that we do in terms of our training and teaching. So just having pulled out some of the stats, so about 51% of all our stats have taken our cert in teaching and learning, and a lot of them have gone on to diploma and masters, and I think that's really where it's important. And I've been getting some fantastic ideas here this morning in terms of like the champions idea, and we've done a lot of that work already, but I think sometimes it's superficial. It's about how is it sustainable, how do we really embed it massively within our schools and departments. So in terms of the numbers of our staff that have gone through it, we're just at about just over 1,600 as of now. So again, a lot of people know what UDL is in UCC. Some don't have a clue what it is, but they've been doing it for a long time. And again, for me, I try to demystify it a small bit. I necessarily don't use the term as much as I probably could or should, because really I know that a lot of my colleagues are doing it, and we're trying to highlight, I suppose, some of that work. Really quickly, I'm just going to touch on a few pieces here. For us, in terms of bringing in the student voice, that for me, when I took on the Inclusive UC project, was massively important. How could we embed what students do into everything that we do? And my big pitch was like, let's bring in as many students to do this work as opposed to being staff. So I was pushing for about 35 student interns. We settled on 18. So we actually, next Tuesday, we have 18 student interns that are starting. We regularly do micro grants out to the universities, out to our colleges. We have 4 core colleges, and we put money into those colleges. And again, the registrar, when we talk about leadership, I'm not sure if it's trust or whatever else, but I go to him and I pitch my ideas, and he you know, I go way up here, we settle somewhere down here, and so for me, again, I often see when we give out grants, the reporting capabilities or the reporting requirements on the other side are often heavy. And we see that even with a lot of small micro grants. And so what we try to do is really minimal reporting structure. Now that's good and bad in that we're not pushing people to come back with incredible ideas, but what we see is phenomenal ideas coming back, stuff that we would have never got had we gone out with those prescriptions. And what we're seeing over the last 12 months, we've had 16 kind of micro projects come back out of 150,000 that we pushed out. And 7 of them have published papers. So some really interesting kind of student insights on those pieces. So that's stuff that I'm very happy to share after. I suppose just to reflect on our accessibility allies, and this is some of the data from last year. Like I say, these will start next week. So we take on 18 interns that will work across 85 modules within the university. So we use Canvas as our VLE. We use Ally that sits on top. And basically what those interns will do is they'll work with our academics. And this isn't just bringing in students to do the accessibility and universal design work. It actually is to bring in, I suppose it's bringing in students to work with capacity building within our departments and schools. And there was a really strong commitment from the staff. So the 85 staff that committed, they have to meet the students 4 times. They have to present back to their departments. There was a list of criteria for them to be part of this. And the idea is that we would build capacity within our institutions. And then obviously we're trying to increase our overall score in terms of accessibility. We work very closely with our colleagues in teaching and learning. And so one of the other projects that's happening in tandem with the Ally piece is we're working with a number of teaching partners. So we're bringing in student partners. So CERTL is a Centre for Integration of Research, Teaching and Learning, which is our teaching department. And the idea there is that they will work in tandem with students that are working on the accessibility, but also the universal design. So we're trying to build, I suppose, capacity within our students to actually work on universal design. And I think that's something for me in this coming year. Like what we've tried to do with our student partners is really embed universal design into the work that they do. So how is it that we can embed universal design into our curriculum, as opposed to it normally being that sort of add-on or that thing that we do as educators? But in actual fact, if our students are giving back presentations that they've literally, before they even think about it, they've turned on captions. That they should be the ones that should be doing that, and we need to look at that next crop, I suppose, of students that come out. I'm very conscious that my time is in red down here, so I'm going to stop. I suppose the one thing for me is it's that kind of 1%, it's that one small change, it's that marginal gain over time. So I'm sure this is something that you've all been doing, but like, what is that one small thing that you will do when you walk away from here? Is that something to do with universal design? Is that something to do with accessibility? And but just commit to one thing, one small change next week. I think that could make the big difference. So listen, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you today.
Thank you, James. It's great to see the passion that James carries up here in the front today. And I think it's with the passion and the great work they're doing down in UCC that he's going to only leave room for one question now, and you'll be able to speak to him later. Thank you.
I have actually have 2 questions, but I only ask one. I'm just wondering about, you talked about your student population over the summer as interns having, they're being paid for this position. How are you incentivizing staff?
Yeah, good question. So just to touch on the students, so we are paying them a little bit above what our student rate is. We also selected all our students from our Access cohort. So we wanted it to be students that have come through disability, mature, or plus programs. At the moment, we're not incentivizing staff. It really is kind of a buy-in. But I think the carrot piece here for staff was that we're going to be pushing as an institution to have a certain level of accessibility within all our modules within the next while. And this is their opportunity to get in early and have the students do some of that work with them. So that was sort of our idea. I mean, just to put in perspective, we had 212 academics apply for the positions, and we had 85 modules that could be reviewed over summer. So
That's fantastic.
There was a lot of interest.
I mean, that's really great. Can I ask the second one really quickly? It's really fast.
Certainly, yes.
It's again about how to engage staff in work. Do you give, because I noticed you have 51% of your staff have already undertaken teaching and learning certificates, and others have gone on in this. Again, is there teaching time from teaching contracts that is given to your staff so that they have time to take those courses?
Not in the time of taking it. I mean, most departments will give some time, but it's not. I mean, it varies. It's very ad hoc across the university. But what I will say is, once they've done the certification, they then have the opportunity to become a CERTL fellow or a fellow of our teaching and learning, and they then will get, I think they get €2,000 per year to partake in training that we would run across the university. So that's often the carrot to get people to do the certification, that they may become a fellow thereafter and obviously pull on the funding.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I'd love to ask everybody those same two questions, because I think that it does vary across the sector.
Absolutely.
And if we're looking at UDL and how we need to make it attractive, it is in its essence, but also it's always nice that extra work is recognized in our staff and with our students. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. And again, James is around for this afternoon if anyone else has any further questions. Thank you.
So it's great to be engaging with some of you. Yeah, you're gonna do. Oh, it's like down. Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be the topic today. I'm just going to start with a quick land acknowledgement and acknowledge that I work on the unceded and traditional territory of the Tekamlus, the Sequapim people within Sequapim Hulu, and that I live on the land, on the unceded and traditional territories of the Silex people. Thanks for bearing with me as we do this. This is really important for us Canadians as we go through the process of decolonization, and I'm glad that actually decolonization was brought up. UDL is becoming increasingly important in terms of decolonization and indigenization around the world, so also keep that in mind. Also, I have very few minutes, but just to say that obviously you have to think about UDL in format as you're talking about UDL. It's always hard, especially when you have 18 minutes. I have created a Padlet. I'm going to put up my slides on my Twitter feed and my LinkedIn feed. Please interact with the Padlet or see me at lunch, but if you want to continue these conversations after today and tomorrow, we can continue all week. Objectives of the session, well, I think you've got it summarized here, right? I'm so glad you had this on the last page. You've got these three stakeholders. I would add another one here, accessibility and disability folks. And that's a challenge, right? We're all working towards the same thing, but we actually come from very different environments. And by this, I think we've got to think that when we think about multidisciplinarity, and we'll have a few minutes to think about what it means in a while, we've got to know that the people on this graph, and if you add disability and accessibility folks, we actually come from different backgrounds, we have different trainings, we don't work from the same theoretical sort of frameworks, and often we don't even belong to the same professional organizations. All right. I like to say that higher education, further education are complex, multi-layered, and politicized environment. So doing this work together towards UDL is actually a lot more complicated than we think. The path for funding is actually one of the first documents I've seen around the world that actually talks about multidisciplinary approach to UDL work. So it's really, really encouraging. But it's not because you put the word that we're there yet. We have a lot of thought to do about how we're actually going to get there and how we're going to break out of these silos. So what I propose to you today in 17 minutes is to very quickly peel the onion, right? And look at the various layers and the things that we have to consider in terms of communication, breaking down silos, creating osmosis, creating the right discourse between these stakeholders. Now, I say peeling the onion because it doesn't mean that any of these layers is any more important or that should be prioritized over the other. It's just a way forward to start looking at these different layers, right? So we'll start high up with faculty, look at accessibility folks, we'll look at senior administration, which we've started doing today in the activity, and also look at students as well. Personal lens, just in 1 minute, because often I find it's important to say, but why is this guy talking? What does he know about this? I mostly have a career as an educator in K-12, being a principal, and then working as faculty in education. But in the middle, I took a break, and for 4 years while I was doing PhD, I worked in accessibility. And I was head of accessibility on a large campus, 40,000 students. And as part of that role, I was what they called in that campus a senior forum manager, which means that I was automatically part of certain Senate committees, certain dean's tables. And that for me was really eye-opening because you don't always understand the complexity of our organizations until you sit on these committees and you see that every decision you make has that sort of domino effect and processes that are very, very complex. So that's what I drove from in a lot of my work around strategy. There's also a good level of triangulation with all this. For 4 years, we were publishing as a unit and we were getting feedback from the people we were presenting to on UDL. So all of the qualitative data that we sort of collected was also really triangulated with each of the stakeholder groups, which helped us build that toolbox, because they kept telling us, well, you don't talk about this, and this is what we care about. You don't talk about this, and this is what we care about. So this is the sort of cumulated journey that we went on. So first, while I have a sip of water because I've got terrible allergies and I'm going to start coughing, think about what is multidisciplinarity, right? We see that word a lot and it's kind of a buzzword, but what does it actually mean? Think for 1 second as I have a sip. It's a little dangerous that we're very quick to use it. And again, if you go back to that graph, this is where we're supposed to be. This is what multidisciplinarity is, right? We all come together. But as we come together, do we really share the same language? Do we really have the same perspectives? Do we actually work collaboratively? I'm going to suggest that it's a lot harder and we have a lot of work to do. Now, obviously, beyond multidisciplinarity, you have interdisciplinarity, which if really we want to work collectively on UDL, we are going to have to get to one day. Now, if you're not familiar with the difference, I was asked this question 3 times in a job interview, by the way. It's important to have it in your mind. It does come up a lot in higher ed. The difference is that with multidisciplinarity, we all come forward here and we work collectively, and then you all go back to your offices. Interdisciplinarity, one day we will go there and we will work there, and we will not go back to our own domain or our own discipline or our own field. And that's going to be really important, because when we think about leadership, who do we put in the driver's seat? Eventually, you're going to need a stakeholder that is actually made up from all of these different groups, but that actually have the specific duty of actually moving UDL forward, right? And so that's going to be a lot of work beyond multidisciplinarity. So let's think about accessibility in faculty, right, and that relationship. So first of all, faculty are really often misunderstood. I'm one now, so I can tell you often we can be in rooms where you feel really small and sort of a lot of criticism is led against faculty. But I think we've got to realize the difference in lived experience between the people who advocate for UDL, I'm part of that, and the people who actually have to implement it on the ground. And often with the best of intentions, they can find it really, really hard to do what we ask them to do, because they are overworked, over-solicited, under-resourced, and they have more and more expectations to attain to. It's a big, wide topic. We only have a few minutes, so I'm not going to talk about everything that we could open up here, but I asked you to think about these things perhaps as we go through lunch and during the afternoon, in terms of some of the things that came up on our table, where tenure and promotion, you know, what are the criteria for people to actually move forward? If we want UDL to matter, it has to be in there somewhere. We have to make this sip through into the cultures of the department, right? So we don't have heads of departments who say things like I've just said at my table, oh, no one cares about your teaching, right? It's all about research. And that's mindsets that we have to change, and it's going to take a while to change this. But also think about inviting unions in, right? At the moment, I think there's very few instructor and faculty unions around the world that actually invited at the table to talk about how does this affect our workload? How does this affect our pay, our end of year sort of work plan, sort of accountability, and etc. If you're interested in this, it was the topic of my talk at the HEA conference, and I called it the two solitudes. In Canada, we tend to talk about the two solitudes being the French and the English, and they don't understand anything about each other. And I've taken the same allegory to think about, in terms of promoting this, we really have two different lived experience here. I did create a microsite for that keynote, so I encourage you to look at that site, and it's all sort of written out with references, etc. So you'll have time to engage with that. And do feel free to contact me if you have questions. The next one is senior administration. So it was interesting that just before we talked and we had that interactive exercise about senior leadership, the lesson I learned about senior leadership is that when you walk in and you talk about UDL, the things that are going to create receptiveness are not the arguments that you think are going to create receptiveness, right? I used to walk into these meetings with deans and the registrar, etc., and talk about social justice, the social model of disability. No one cares. That's not what they want to hear. Then I started talking about dollar signs and saying, this is not actually financially sustainable. And then the eyes open. You have to adapt your language, and you have to talk to people in a language that they understand. And part of that multidisciplinarity is that you have to look in your toolbox for the arguments that actually are going to convince these different professionals that you're working with. What they care is about market share, branding, attracting a clientele which is diminishing around the world, and doing sustainable development. So making sure your institution continues to thrive. If you can fit UDL within that discourse, you are going to get buy-in. So as you go into rooms, you're going to have your different arguments, your different cards. It's like playing poker, and you choose your card depending on who's in the room, right? And if you have senior administration, certain cards will have a lot more impact than others. So think about that. Now, obviously, there's also something we have to be critical about. We are in a very neoliberal environment where it's very easy, and we're discussing this at my table, to say, oh, we're interested in learner diversity because it's a branding asset, right? We do this. We are going to have a role of having to poke that balloon and say, is this just words or is it real, right? And it's going to be having to be our role in that multidisciplinary alliance to say, if you do the talking, you have to do the walking, right? It's like, it's got to match, your actions have to match with it can't just be a marketing trick. So think about that too in the way you engage and the way you bring these people to the table. The next element is the student affairs and student services. There's actually a lot of potential here. And I think we are talking about the classroom and beyond the classroom, but I don't think we even imagine to what extent UDL can actually really change a campus culture when you start to say it actually affects every interaction with students. When I left McGill, we'd worked for 4 years, the most surprising partners that we had were, hang for it, security, residences. Now, you would never think that this would be your biggest UDL advocates, but it does make sense, right? Right away, we had a head of security would come forward and say, I've heard you talk on UDL. That's exactly what we're facing. We have this diverse student population. We don't know how to engage with them anymore. We've got to rethink how we engage with them. Residences, the first request we ever got about UDL was head of residences came and said, could you do workshops for floor reps? Because they are faced every day with student diversity, and they have one way of designing activities, social events, etc., and they've never thought about student diversity. And these become really momentous partners, because when you think about driving a discourse on a campus, these are actually the partners that are actually going to feed energy into the work that you're trying to do. So they're very important to have at the table. Within student services as well, I had very little resistance when I worked in McGill. There's a lot of services where you're going to say, look at your interaction with in your service delivery. It doesn't work. You're being sort of service-centric in the way you design something, but it doesn't suit the clientele that you're looking at. Now, these folks have a desire to serve the widest population. So the moment you talk to them about UDL, they actually are going to rethink their format of delivery, and they are going to become your ally. But they do have to be invited to the table, and it does take some work, right? So think about the work that you have to do in terms of, first of all, making the UDL discourse hospitable, so that it invites people in and doesn't push them out, right? We have a tendency to talk a jargon that sometimes makes it very difficult for stakeholders who are not used to it to walk into that agenda, that momentum, and that discourse. So think about the work that you have to do. Right, so in about 3 minutes, I do want to cover this notion of dribbling it down to frontline staff. So it's all very well to think about multidisciplinary efforts when you have all these stakeholders, right? Again, that you could picture in this way. But even within each of the stakeholders, you have to think that even there, we have different jobs, different training, different position. We are very hierarchical in higher education. And the challenge we had, for example, when I worked in accessibility was, well, we've refocused the whole unit on being UDL. But can we do that when my frontline staff is welcoming students in a way that perpetuates medical model, the deficit model perspectives? What do I mean by that? Is that the first person they ever would encounter was someone who would pick up the phone and say, you want an appointment, do you have documentation? So as much as I would be working on UDL, the person who mattered and created that first contact with students was actually someone who, without knowing, was perpetuating the thing that we were trying to actually erode and take away. So think about that. Think about within your units, within your departments, within whatever unit, administrative unit you're in, you are going to have to dribble this down. That takes a lot of time. I remember we were coming back from an AHEAD conference, not the Irish AHEAD conference, but the American AHEAD conference, and we were sitting on a plane with a colleague, and we looked at each other and we said, we have to empower everyone within the office to do this, but how do we do that? And what we did, we decided we get them a whole year, and we actually focus on our own stuff, saying, what does UDL mean for you? And that meant the frontline staff, the exam scheduler, the person who's working in assistive technology. We asked them to rethink their work within a UDL perspective. And we gave them ownership and said, you take a whole year and you come back to us and tell us how your job is going to change and what it means for you. And it was extremely powerful. And the best example I have of this is my exam guy, whose only job was basically to schedule finals and you know, who came back and he had basically deconstructed the whole registration. And normally, you know, we would have the students have to fill a form, give the form in, and then he would create a schedule, and then he would go to exam services, etc. He had said, I don't need to do that. I can bypass this. I can go straight to the examination services database in the university. I can cross-reference anyone who's ever walked through our door with that database, and I can create a space for exams for them. Then they can have a choice. Do they go to the place where they have accommodations, or do they want to go to the normal place in a gymnasium, etc.? It's their choice. They don't have to decide. They have no form to fill in. They can, on the day, decide what they want to do. He had come up with that solution. He had rethought his job in light of UDL as a framework, right? It does take patience. I'm a person who's very objective driven. It took a lot of learning for me as a leader to say, hang on, people don't work and function at the same tempo that I do. I need to give people in my department a lot of time to rethink what this means and to really think in terms of sustainable development. What does it mean for my own career, my own job description, etc.? But it was very empowering for me, and it really gave me a sort of example of what I need to do systematically all the time. So I encourage you to think of the same. An added problem there is that within the 4 years I was at McGill, a lot of people had come and gone. So how do you create an onboarding that is also sustainable? You are going to have to record some of this. You are going to have to create sort of onboarding website or something for your unit so that you don't have to repeat this all the time, because there will be new people arriving and they need to be able to get into the mindset. Otherwise, you're getting what we're seeing across the world at the moment. You've got these pockets of UDL initiatives, and then they assume, well, we've done all the work, we're fine. Well, no, because new people have come and new people have arrived and new people have started, and that work is ongoing. So once you create the mindset, you have to sustain the mindset, and some of the resources have to carry on being available, etc. And we did present on this at a conference on UDL. Now, the student perspective was talked about a lot today, so I'm not going to go into this too much, and I did write a paper on this, and it's available on open access online. All I would say is that, you know, and it has been stressed in the session beforehand, so I'm not going to spend too much of my 3 minutes left, in the sense that, yes, that power dynamic is really problematic. We're very quick to say we want student voice, but we create very few opportunities where we actually are ready to listen to the student voice. In a very recent example in my own job, I said, could we maybe have a student advisory body for our faculty? And if you see the reaction, it does scare people. And it's ridiculous. I've worked with student advisory bodies before in accessibility. They never make requests that are not justified. They make requests that are sound and have a reason for being voiced. So we have to listen. We have to get much better at being ethnographic in the way we listen and we record the student voice. And also be careful of the power dynamics, right? Very quickly, I would say that sometimes in universities you have accessibility around the world. Accessibility services are very quick to say, oh, we listen. But then if you see who they listen to a very compliant service user who's very happy and comes back to tell you how happy they are. They don't listen to the person who came once, never came back, because they were actually not very satisfied with the way it was run. So think about that as well. If you're interested in this notion of ethnography, I invite you to look at this website. It's the Ontario College for Arts and Design, and it has an inclusive design unit, Center for Inclusive Design, with some real world expert, I would say at this point. And they talk about going beyond UDL. Now, it may shock you because we're not at UDL yet, but they say we need to go beyond UDL. And the piece that they say will be missing is that they say that even if we walk into a room and we think about the most common barriers, we have to keep being curious about the things that we can't even imagine or we can't even conceptualize. And that requires a degree of curiosity for the student experience, for the student's lived experience. And they do a lot of writing about saying, how can we be constantly ethnographic about the way we record and we use that user experience, the word that we've looked at before. Remaining strategic challenges, I always put this slide at the end to remind you that this is really, really complex work. I've been in this now for, I'd say, 12 years. For the first 6, 7, I was focused mostly on convincing people that this made sense pedagogically, that there were benefits and positive outcomes. I've spent the next 7 telling people how complex it is and that they better, get in there and think about the complexity. I'm glad we talked about ecology a lot today. I think that's the central lens that we have to keep applying. Again, we are in these organizations that are extremely vast, extremely complex, they're historical, they have a lot of bureaucracy. We're not going to move them along unless we understand the complexity of what we're faced with, right? And within that complexity, come back to this, look at your stakeholders and make sure that you find creative, innovative ways of bringing them to the table. In student services particularly, I'm just going to finish with this, but it's really important. The notion of learner diversity is really exploding, and there are definitely stakeholders that are not at the table now. The people who are looking after second language learners, international students, lifelong learners, we are not inviting them to the table. They need to be there. UDL is just as important for them as it is for learners with disabilities. This is not this or that. It's all of these students are going to find UDL very important. So that's it. I'll leave you with that, and there's maybe time for questions. I don't know. That's just I'm just going to go contact slide. There we go.
Thank you, Frederick. Ladies and gentlemen, I can open the floor for one question. I'm sure the tummies are rumbling at this stage, so one question, and you can speak to Frederick throughout the session later. Thank you. Darren.
Hi Frederick, thanks as always for very, very thought-provoking stuff. You mentioned that you spent the first 6, 7 years of your time on this topic looking at the pedagogical value, and the second 6 or 7 telling people how complex this was. What do you think the next 6 or 7 years holds for you in this regard? What do you think you're trying to be talking about when we come to the AHEA conference in 5 years' time?
Well, I think it's, and these conversations have already happened during coffee, etc. I think that we don't have yet a deep enough understanding of how much the post-pandemic landscape has changed. I think all of our institutions are in complete turmoil, in a great positive turmoil. I think we are going to have to reinvent a lot of things. It's not because the pandemic is over. An example I was given this morning is this thirst for hybrid teaching and for hybrid service provision, etc. People are not going to go back to the old usual or the old normal. They want a new normal, a new going forward. And I think it's both a great opportunity for us because UDL fits really well in that, but it is a really dynamic time where there's going to be even more of a need for a reflection on user experience and what do people want and where do we go and what does sustainable development mean and what are our universities going to look like in 5 or 6 years' time. And we have a huge part to play in there. So that's it. I think it's this sort of collective brainstorm, is making sure that we have the table when that collective brainstorm is happening. And I think it's starting to happen just about everywhere globally in the world. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, really well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. Frederick, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Niamh. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to chair this next team, which focuses on furthering UDL in the classroom, an academic perspective on overcoming obstacles. And I was sitting at the back looking at the ladder here beside me, climbing that ladder, and I'm looking at lunch. So I reckon we're 2/3 up the ladder today, so we're nearly there for your lunch. So we have 2 presentations for this team. I'm delighted to firstly introduce my colleague, Dr. Ruth Quinn. Ruth is a lecturer at HEA Sligo in her own Faculty of Engineering and Design. She's a water engineer with a focus on community water management. Having recently transitioned to a more teaching-focused role, Ruth is keen to implement research-led teaching in her modules and combine it with other teaching practices such as UDL.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Ruth and I'm a assistant lecturer in civil engineering here at HEA Sligo. And I'm just going to talk today about my experiences incorporating UDL into my teaching. And it's going to be, I won't say repeating, but reinforcing a lot of the excellent presentations we've seen earlier, but with my take on things, I suppose. So as Una said, I am a water engineer, so this is what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about incorporating green spaces into our environments to combat the issues we have with climate change, with water management, making sure we have enough water, making sure we don't have too much water, and doing that. I suppose I'm an interdisciplinary engineer in that I went over to social science and I didn't really come back. So I work with a lot of social scientists about how to create these systems so that they have different kind of social and well-being impacts as well. So moving on to my journey through UDL. So the first time I heard about UDL was at a job interview, which is never the best time to hear about a new acronym. And I had to hold up my hand and be like, I don't know what that means. But I didn't get that job, but luckily I got this one. So now I'm standing here, and I came to the HEA Sligo and I saw, okay, there's a UDL conference. I can finally understand what it means. So I went to the conference and I learned about it. I learned about the UDL badge. So then I was like, next steps, UDL badge. And then I learned about the UDL badge, which is amazing. Shout out to the UDL badge, do it if you haven't done it already. And I implemented UDL in my teaching, and now I'm here to kind of just do a little bit of a reflection about what different things I tried, what went well, what didn't go so well, those kind of things. So the first step is engagement, so engagement with the students. And just to talk a little bit, so I saw this great thing on the UDL badge. It was a student and she was talking about how the lecturer gave her a choice in topics and that it was so great because she could pursue her passion and look at different things. I was like, oh, it's great. I'll do that. and I thought it'll be great for me because, the assignments when I'm marking it won't be so repetitive, and people get to choose their topic. So I said to the students, oh, you can do this project about any building in the world that you want to. And I thought I was going to get a great array of buildings. And I had 70 students, and I got 60 projects about the Eiffel Tower. So I learned a lot about the Eiffel Tower. And also I got 5 on the Burj Al Khalifa and 5 on Croke Park. So just, and the students actually came back to me and said, we've never been offered a choice before. We got scared. So, another barrier the students have. I had some of the students do a play. And they had a choice whether they did an assignment or a play, and some of them did a play. And they really, really enjoyed it. I have no idea if they learned anything or not. But they had great fun. So the next, representation. So I worked really, really hard. So I don't know if you guys all use Moodle, and if you put something up on Moodle, you get this accessibility checker, which is great, but also the bane of your life sometimes. Because I never knew tables had headers. But they do, and if you don't include that, it shouts at you. And then it becomes like, oh, I need to get all the accessibility, but it's a great, great tool, and if you see it on Moodle, it'll tell you what you're doing right and you're doing wrong. And slides in advance. I tried to do that, not always successful, but another good thing that we can do. So action and expression, and again, echoing what was said earlier, I gave the students a choice in assessment. 51 chose a report, 2 chose a presentation. Now the ones who did a presentation did a really, really good job, but again, we never done a presentation before. We didn't do that in Loomster. We're not doing it now. So and also peer assessment. So the students had to do in-class presentations. So I said, okay, the students vote on your best one and give people feedback, and you'll get a prize. Now, I should have said the prize would be a Moodle badge, because they actually thought they were going to get something, and I think they're a little bit disappointed. But what was really interesting is they chose presentations I wouldn't have chose. So those students got a bit of a recognition as well, because my students were very focused on the best ideas rather than did they put slide numbers on or did they put their hands in their pockets and all these things that I'd be looking for. Students went, that's a brilliant idea, that wins. So, I kind of tried to take all the topics about UDL that I learned and put it into one project on a thing that I'm passionate about, which is rainwater harvesting. So I got the students to reimagine a rainwater harvesting for a local community group. because they were all first year students, and we, quite often with first year in engineering anyway, we go, do a group project, it'd be grand. And they have no concept of doing a group project. They've never done it before, and they're just supposed to know how they do it. So I gave them all roles. So somebody was a project manager, somebody was a sales engineer, design engineer, analyst, and they all had different tasks. So the design engineer did a little balsa wood model. The project manager was in charge of coordinating it and putting everything on the design space they had. Sales engineer had to make a little video selling the product that they were making, and the analyst had to show it work with charts and a poster. So the students actually got to choose in their group who they wanted to be. And the feedback I got from it, so I gave them a little feedback form, and when the students went, "You've put a lot of work into this, you're doing a good job," which is actually the most meaningful thing a student has ever said to me. So yeah, so as you can see from the number of responses, we've got a really, I handed out 50 forms and I got 19 back, which I think is pretty good going, to be fair. And a lot of them enjoyed it. The ones that didn't hated teamwork, so I feel that wasn't fair because they have to do that. And the ones that were were just like, it was grand, like nothing bad about it. But some of the things the students liked was I gave them all checklists. So every week they had a checklist of activities. They were the project manager, I have to do this and this and this and this. And you can do it this way and you can do it that way. And I think I gave them the right amount of choice, and they were like, we want checklists for everything. And I was like, well, I'll try my best, but And suggestions, they were just kind of like more of the same, less of teamwork again, I think it's the bane of everybody's life. So some of the barriers that I faced while doing this is knowledge. Now, it's not specifically knowledge of UDL, it's more like knowledge of what I'll be teaching next semester, or knowledge of what I'll be teaching next week as well sometimes. So you need to kind of know what you're doing, and sometimes we're not always teaching the courses that we're most passionate about, so sometimes it's just learning as you're going. And I found that my most effective UDL practices have been in things I know about, and obviously time, a massive thing. And just to answer, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but your question earlier, no, I didn't get any additional time to do this. This was all kind of, and it was about rainwater harvesting tanks, so I didn't mind because I like that. So I see my time is up, but just one thing I'd like to point out about this is a top-down approach, and we talked a lot earlier about how we can get buy-in from leadership. But what I would like to challenge leadership is implementing UDL in the way they talk to staff and things like that, because we're asked for our opinion on policy documents and things, and I don't really always know a lot about policy documents, and I don't really know what I'm looking at when I'm reading them. So if we could have a different way of engaging with staff in the topics that they want our opinions on, that would be helpful, I think, because then everybody would see it, because we're all getting these email messages, so everybody would see it embedded. So thank you very much for your time, and just shout out to Tamsin and our graphical facilitation course.
Fantastic. Any questions for Ruth?
Talking about giving time for people to take part in additional training, or that sort of thing. So, I completely get it. And some people don't, some people do. It's interesting that some do and don't.
Yeah, no, I was just talking about with the UDL badge. So I kind of didn't have any additional time to do it, but it was...
But that's 6 hours, is it? Or anyway, it's 25, yeah. Well, it's 6 hours of actual, and then you've got the rest for self-directed.
Yeah, no. I was just commenting.
No, and that, what, that was I should have said first, that was a brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to Ruth, because we've had Ruth present at some of our faculty meetings, and she brings her presentations to life. And I think that graphics course at Tasman, you can see it coming to life here, so well done on that. So next up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Claire Finnegan-Coyne. Claire is a lecturer in biology at St Angela's College, Sligo. Since joining St Angela's College in 2018, Claire has carried out research on digital innovations in science practical classes and third level education, and most recently examining student outcomes following degree completion with ATU Sligo. The title of Claire's presentation is Digital Innovation in Science Education, a UDL Approach to Support Learning in Science Practical Classes. So Claire, you've 8 minutes.
I'm feeling very much like speeches before dinner at a wedding here. It's like, get on with it, come on. So thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so I know people hear science and some people go, oh, science. I have no idea why. But what I'm going to talk about is not so much about the science part of this, but really focus on how we can create practical videos that align to UDL principles and support student learning. So my intention here really was to give you a brief overview of kind of where do we fit in with the principles of UDL, but to be honest, better people than me have spoken about it today, so I'm going to keep that very brief. I want to talk to you about a project that is trying to leverage videos as a UDL tool in science labs. Science labs can be very intimidating for undergraduate students. You know, think of yourself as a young undergrad coming into a brand new environment somewhere you haven't been before. It's nice to have something to sort of ease you into it, and the videos hopefully will play that role. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their obstacles to implementation. So very briefly, I think most people here would have an appreciation that video can be really useful as aligning to UDL principles. It gives you multiple modalities and formats for students to engage with material. Students can manipulate the material and draw meaning from it in their own way, and they can engage with it in different ways. We're trying to activate, trying to motivate learners. So the project that I'm working on here is creating an evergreen bank of biology lab technique videos that are aligned to UDL principles. And one of the first questions that get asked when I say I'm creating these videos is, why are you not just taking videos from YouTube? Do you like the torture and the work, or what do you like here? And the first thing is, YouTube is really excellent. If you want to start increasing just different modes, different methods of instruction, to introduce some other formats to your presentation, to your teaching, it's very useful. It's also great, like if you really want to live stream the World Championships with table tennis, really good for that too, but to be honest, that's probably a little aside. But there's such a diversity of what you can get on YouTube. So why make your own? One of the reasons is the academic quality. So you can control exactly what is going into the videos. You can tailor the content for the students and ensure that there's a really cohesive approach, a cohesive style throughout the videos that gives students a better inclusive learning environment. And you also own the videos, so you can do what you like with them. So in our case, we're looking to translate them into Irish and translate them into Irish Sign Language, which is something that really hasn't been done to this point. So I should mention that the project is called DICE, which was in the introduction, Digital Innovation in Science Education. I'm a sucker for an acronym, so I do like a nice acronym. So how are these videos aligning to UDL? What can you do if you're creating videos and you want to ensure they are as inclusive as possible? And one of the very first things is you keep them short and you keep them sweet. So a little bit like me. I feel like I could do in a box here, actually. So the first thing is they need to be about 2 to 5 minutes long, tops. Students start cutting off at about 6 minutes. So studies show median engagement is 6 minutes. Doesn't matter if you have longer, you're losing them after that. You guys are well aware of that. How many times have you drifted off here today? How many times are you looking up there and going, oh yeah, that's interesting. Oh, I'll do that. Was that a giant fish outside? And you get distracted. So it's in terms of like relevance. It's not just the content, it's visual relevance. Like the background on the videos is really clear. There's no clutter, there's no other equipment there just for show. It's really keeping it focused. And it's very important as well in the videos that there are, really conscious, you're providing alternatives to the information that's usually found in large swathes of text. So here's like what's happening in a test tube during an experiment. And I always liken this to, it's kind of like giving you the option of doing maths in your head or doing it with a pen and paper. If I tell you there now, okay, give this a go, 5,763 multiplied by 319. Everyone's going, no. And most people, once there was more than two digits, went, no, I'm done with the numbers. So the idea here is like, if I gave you a pen and paper to do that, you can put it into a format that is suitable for you. You break it down into digestible chunks, and that is what video does. So as well, breaking videos down into chapters. Okay, here the chapters are the background theory, the safety, the materials, and then the protocol. Students have more autonomy on what they want to look at. Rewatching just the bits that they need, they can get more direction.
We're also looking to provide alternative language options. So at the moment, they're English voiceover, English captions, but we're also looking to provide, we have some piloted in Irish at the moment, and as well, I was hoping to have some Irish sign language for you here today, and I see my captions there in Irish, they should be in English for that. And I was asked recently, like, why would you do captions and sign language interpretation as well as kind of a picture-in-picture thing? And the idea here is best explained to me at the time was, it's kind of like having a video for somebody who doesn't have hearing difficulties with just captions. You're missing that voiceover. You're missing that extra level of accessibility where you get so much more from it. Now, there's been a lot of barriers with this that I will talk to you about in just a moment. So just in terms of action and expression, very important that videos really provide students with the opportunity to sort of move it around at their own pace. So to pick the bits they're interested in, to speed things up, to slow things down. It gives students an opportunity to take a little bit more ownership of what they are doing through just a different modality, through a different format. And I'm probably going to divide people here a little bit as well. I really like comment boxes on videos. I really like the chat boxes. And apparently students do as well. So students have reported that over COVID, when they were learning on Zoom, they were more comfortable asking questions through Zoom chat. Now, I know you guys have been really generous with your thoughts and your comments and questions today. I kind of feel like I should keep complimenting you there. You're also beautiful and wise and erudite. But think back to what it was like to be a 17, 18-year-old. Wouldn't it have been nice to have some sort of facility to foster that confidence within you, to foster that communication between students and instructors that can be quite difficult for some students, if not all students? So I'm kind of coming close to my time there, so I really do want to talk a little about the obstacles. So the first one is with regard to the Irish Sign Language translations. So the first thing with this is, if you're looking to do it, it's a very, usually a very limited number of people carry it out, so it's actually quite a costly enterprise. Just to give you an idea, I have gotten quotes for a 5-minute video translated into Irish Sign Language, ranging from €330 for a 5-minute video to €5,990 for a video. So there's a massive range. And the thing about it is really something that is requiring an awful lot of expertise. So if you're thinking about your own subject discipline, there's a lot of technical terms there that will not have an Irish Sign Language translation. So the interpreter needs to come up with a translation for that and submit it to the ISL dictionary. And it just adds to the complication and the length of the process. And we've talked quite a bit about time here today. Like, time is a major barrier to creating your own educational videos to go alongside your lectures, alongside your labs. So as an idea, like, one of these videos, if it's about 5 minutes long, it's going to take me about 2 days, start to finish, to develop the whole thing, to animate everything, to record it, to edit it, to put the captions on, the voiceover on. And I think I've actually gotten quite fast at this, and it still takes that amount of time. But I really don't want that to put you off it. If it's something you're interested in, there are really quick ways to sort of speed up this process. That reference there actually has a lovely practical list of things you can do. So things like make them really short, keep them very relevant, develop a very clear script and a plan from the start so you're not backing and forth, and make something that's really repeatable, that you can just do again, okay? So you know your format, you know, okay, I do background, safety, materials, protocol in my case, always the same. It will speed things up and it adds a lot to your content. And finally then, with regard to student use, so when I was starting to create these, I had this thought of going, right, now, how can I make sure that students use these? And it's kind of like what Ruth was talking about there. I put in all this effort, how can I make sure they use them? And immediately had to go, oh no, that's pure ego talking, so it is. Because it's completely antithetical to UDL principles. The whole point is that they are there, they are accessible for the students, and those that need them can access them without having to ask for special accommodations. That is the whole point of them. So where we are now, I'm doing my final recording in the next couple of weeks among marking and everything else, and getting ready to send away for our final translations, with the idea that these are going to be made available to students in the academic year starting in September in our undergrad biology. So The students are then going to be provided with the opportunity to give a lot of feedback, because there's a great adage that I like of, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is, okay? So we need to get that student voice captured to make sure that these are the best resource they can possibly be. Because going back to that time thing, these are a lot of time investment right now, but the idea is hopefully it's investment once and then repeated uses. So at that point, we're getting you away to lunch at this point, so I'm happy to take any questions, and you have been incredibly patient. Thank you so much.